There is great concern that the Easter long weekend could be a catalyst for the predicted third wave as religious South Africans prepare for Easter Sunday service. The government has called on all South Africans to stick to COVID-19 protocols and to be responsible over the coming days. But are churches and places of worship prepared to strictly enforce COVID-19 measures to safeguard their congregants? For more on this, I'm joined by Michael Swain, Director from the organisation 4SA. Michael, very good afternoon and happy Good Friday. And I suppose that first question is, are churches prepared to adhere to the regulations?
It's important to note that the President commended churches and other religious organisations throughout the pandemic for their adherence to the regulations. You know, churches have been the most heavily regulated of all sectors. We have significant measures of social distancing, record keeping, sanitation, hygiene protocols in place. And I'm fully convinced that the religious sector, because pastors and imams and priests and rabbis care for their congregation, of course they're going to be taking great precautions to make sure that their safety and their health is obviously looked after.
Don't you suppose, though, therefore, just for a minute, that because of the nature of religion and the brotherliness around churches and other religious organizations, that people tend to maybe just relax a little bit?
I've been to many services during the pandemic when they've been permitted, and I have seen consistently social distancing adhered to, people wearing masks, people making sure that they are not doing what we would otherwise normally do, which is to obviously, get close to one another. I mean, we have to understand that worshipping God is a community thing. That's what our Constitution guarantees. It is something that we do together. But that notwithstanding, we have, and I have certainly seen, that this has been very much adhered to by the religious community, because obviously it's important. This is a pandemic. This is a serious situation. People have got sick. And obviously, I think pastors and imams and, religious leaders particularly are very diligent in their adherence to the government regulations.
So do you think this focus on religious organizations is somewhat unfair, this singling out, if you will?
I think it's completely unfair, and that is very much the nature of the court case which Freedom of Religion South Africa 4SA is currently issuing and has issued in the High Court against the Cogta minister. There is no evidence whatsoever to show that religious gatherings have been super spreader events. Government has not produced any such evidence. And we have to remember that any time a constitutional right is restricted, which it is allowed to be under Section 36 of our Constitution, it must always be rational, it must be reasonable, justifiable, and proportionate. So even this Easter, for example, I looked at the figures for the Western Cape, where I live. For the last 10 days, deaths from COVID, and bear in mind that they affect people typically with comorbidities in the over 60 age group category, have been in single digits for the last 10 days. That's out of a population of nearly 6 million people. So literally, on a probability scale, that's like zero. So government cannot simply just arbitrarily shut down and lock down. I'm not saying that we didn't agree, and we did, that there should be a cap on numbers over the Easter weekend. Our recommendation was actually 500 indoors and 1,000 outdoors, and that would have given, we believe, even mega churches the opportunity to celebrate perhaps to a greater scale than they are allowed to currently. But we honestly would support after Easter 50% at least, and a return to normalcy as soon as possible. We cannot stay locked down and masked up forever.
I agree, we can't, but there's also a measure of reasonableness which you speak of. And in a situation where we are devoid of information, doesn't it preclude the government to be safe in spite of all of this?
Well, absolutely. And government, perhaps at the beginning, which is why I think everybody supported at the beginning, even the hard lockdown was widely supported. But now we have evidence, we have data, we know what this disease does, we know who it affects, we have developed far better treatments for it, our resources are greater, vaccinations are coming in, many of our population have already been infected, our opportunities for herd immunity have increased. So we can't just simply go on and on and on like this. And government, yes, they must be, they should be, following the science, following the data. It should not be in any way, shape or form based on just a decision based upon fear. It should be based upon fact.
Now, you talk about the numbers in the Western Cape and obviously single-digit figures. What do you think the Western Cape is doing right that potentially everybody else could learn from?
I think the Western Cape is like every other place. There have been adherence to regulations. There have been definitely a lot more interaction, perhaps. That's the only place that I know of, but I know there's been very good interaction with provincial government. There's been a kind of a task team has been set up from very early days. And so, yes, I think communication is a very important thing. It's much easier, I think, and perhaps more acceptable when people are trusted to make their health decisions, when they're given the facts, when they're given the information by government. That allows, I think, people to make up their own minds and their own decisions. That's what we think should happen. We think that people should be permitted to make their own health choices, both religious leaders on whether or not to open, because you don't have to open even if you can, and also on congregants who should be able to decide much the same way as they
Michael,
can
decide. I'm not entirely sure if it is fair to allow individuals or groups to make up their own minds and decisions, one based on the absence of information and knowing very little about the disease or not enough about the disease. Secondly, there was a group that we covered in the Western Cape, I think almost 10 days ago, that was advocating that people shouldn't wear masks altogether.
What I'm talking about people should be able to make up their mind about is, given the fact that we are allowed to open up to 250 indoors, 500 outdoors, pastors, imams, religious leaders, they don't have to do that. That's their choice. People don't have to decide, even if their religious gathering is opened, whether they don't have to attend. They should make their own choice. So that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about in any way, shape or form disobeying the regulations, disobeying government's advisories. But I am saying that within that, people should certainly be able to make up their own minds. And we believe, again, the data should be followed. If the evidence is, which it currently is, that we are not in a third wave, that single figures in many places are in evidence, then we should be allowed, we believe, to open up to a far greater measure, particularly after this Easter weekend.
Well, the last couple of weeks have certainly had everybody talking about the possible third wave, and that the possible third wave is likely to happen immediately or sometime after Easter. Do you foresee, firstly, government putting restrictions on church and religious gatherings again, and what are the implications of this? Your thoughts on that, please?
I would definitely say that whatever government may decide to do, they should do equally for the same type of sectors of society. That was our case that we launched in the High Court of Johannesburg back in February, at the beginning of February. Religious gatherings were completely locked down. Other gatherings like casinos and conference centers and cinemas, etc., were allowed to be opened. You cannot point to the religious gathering as somehow a unique super spreader event when similar gatherings are allowed. So yes, we obviously have to understand and to abide by the health and safety protocols that are recommended, but there must be equitability, there must be fairness, there must be reasonableness, and there must be justifiable limitations based upon scientific evidence, not upon fear, not upon conjecture.
Do you think familiarity encourages people to let their guard down?
I think, interestingly enough, I think we've become quite habituated to hand washing, to sanitization, to social distancing, to mask wearing. So I think that's actually something which most people are doing almost as a reflex at the moment. I think it's going to be important at some point when this pandemic does go, and it will go, that we actually get back to normal and live our normal lives.
I suppose my final question at this point is just a little bit of an update on that case that you've got at the High Court. Are you making progress? What do you hope to achieve?
We're hoping to achieve a number of things. The first thing that we're hoping to achieve is that we will get a ruling, and we will get, therefore, legal precedent that government must treat the religious sector fairly and equitably with other similar sectors. Secondly, we believe very importantly that religious workers should be recognized as essential workers, because right from the beginning, they've been at the forefront of this pandemic. And we also believe, of course, that government must be consultative. We, for SA, we have represented, and in this particular case, we have over 11 million people who have basically added their support to our case. So we believe that in that instance, groups like us, other groups too, obviously, should be consulted by government. This is a democratic process that we believe should be followed, and we think that's the most important thing of all.
Michael Swain, thank you kindly for your time this afternoon.